The strange thing about money is that almost none of it is useful by itself. A banknote cannot feed you. A number in a bank account cannot keep you warm. Even a gold coin is just a small piece of metal. And yet, people will spend years of their lives working to obtain these things. They will save them, trade them, borrow them, lend them, tax them, and sometimes fight over them. Entire cities have been built around money. Empires have risen because of it. Wars have been funded with it. And today, most of the world's money does not even exist as physical objects. It exists as numbers. So how did humanity go from exchanging food, animals, tools, and raw materials to trusting tiny pieces of metal stamped with symbols? The answer begins long before coins. Imagine living in a small ancient community. You grow wheat. Your neighbor makes pottery. Someone else hunts animals. Another person knows how to shape stone into tools. At first, exchange seems simple. You have grain. They have a pot. You trade. But what happens when you need a new tool from the stoneworker, while the stoneworker does not want wheat today? Maybe they want meat, and the hunter already has enough. Now you have a problem. Your grain may be valuable. The tool may be valuable. But the two people do not want to trade at the same moment. This is one of the fundamental problems any complex economy must solve. How do you transfer value between people who need different things at different times? The obvious answer might seem to be barter. You trade one useful thing for another. And barter certainly existed. But barter alone is not enough to explain how large economies worked. Because the bigger a society becomes, the harder direct exchange gets. Imagine trying to run a major city where every person must find someone who has exactly what they want and simultaneously wants exactly what they have. The number of possible combinations becomes enormous. You would spend more time negotiating trades than actually producing anything. So humans needed another idea. Instead of trading directly for what you want, what if you could trade for something everyone else was willing to accept? That is where the story of money begins to become interesting. Because money is not really about the object. It is about trust. Long before coins appeared, societies used many different things as forms of money or stores of value. Grain could be measured. Livestock could represent wealth. Metal could be weighed. Shells, beads, and other objects were used in particular societies for exchange or status. But one material had an unusual advantage. Metal did not spoil like food. It could be divided. It could be stored. It could be transported. And some metals were relatively scarce and difficult to obtain. Gold and silver became especially important. But ancient people did not necessarily need a coin to use metal as money. A piece of silver did not have to be round. It did not need a king's face. It could simply be weighed. That detail is crucial. Before standardized coins, precious metal could function through weight. A buyer and seller could agree on a quantity. The metal could be examined. It could be cut. It could be weighed. The problem was that every transaction required trust, measurement, and often careful testing. Was this really silver? Was the weight correct? Had someone mixed it with cheaper metal? Imagine standing in an ancient market trying to make a purchase. You cannot simply glance at a piece of metal and know its value. You need scales. You need standards. You need someone you trust. And suddenly, a tiny object becomes part of a much larger system of measurement and authority. This was one of the great problems that coinage could solve. A coin could take a quantity of metal and turn it into a standardized object. Instead of repeatedly weighing raw metal, you could use a piece that had already been measured. Even more importantly, an issuing authority could place a recognizable mark on it. That mark could communicate something powerful. This piece has been checked. This piece belongs to a known weight standard. This piece is accepted within the system. And now the coin is doing something that a random piece of metal cannot do. It is carrying trust. The earliest coins are generally associated with Lydia in Western Anatolia, where electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, was used in standardized pieces by the late 7th century BCE. The exact origins of coinage remain debated in detail, but the Lydian association is strongly supported by archaeological evidence and later historical accounts. Think about how revolutionary that is. A merchant no longer has to ask only, "How much metal is this?" He can begin asking, "Does this coin belong to an accepted monetary system?" The difference may sound small. It is enormous, because standardization allows strangers to trade, and trade between strangers is one of the foundations of civilization. A farmer does not need to personally know the person selling tools. The toolmaker does not need to personally trust the farmer. Both can trust the system. That is the deeper invention. The coin is only the physical symbol. The real innovation is shared confidence. And once coinage appeared, its usefulness became obvious. Coins were portable. They could be counted. They could be divided into denominations. They could travel from one city to another. They could be collected as taxes. They could be paid to soldiers. They could move through markets. The Greek world rapidly adopted coinage, and different cities developed their own standards, denominations, and designs. Precious metal coins commonly derived their value substantially from weight and metal content rather than behaving like modern fiat money. Now imagine what that meant for a growing state. A ruler needed soldiers. Soldiers needed food. Food producers needed tools. Craft workers needed raw materials. Merchants needed transportation. Suddenly, all these separate activities could be connected through a common medium of exchange. Money turned a complicated web of human needs into something that could be measured, and rulers quickly understood something else. Money could be controlled. A state could define standards. It could issue coins. It could collect taxes. It could pay armies. It could put symbols of authority onto pieces of metal that traveled from hand to hand. A coin could therefore do two jobs at once. It could facilitate economic exchange, and it could advertise political power. Look closely at ancient coins and you often find rulers, gods, animals, symbols, or other imagery connected to the issuing authority. The little object in your hand was not only a unit of value, it was a message. This is legitimate. This belongs to this political system. This ruler stands behind it. The ancient world discovered something that remains true today. Money works partly because people believe other people will accept it. That sounds almost absurd when you say it aloud. Why should a stranger give you food in exchange for a piece of metal? Because the stranger expects that someone else will accept the same piece tomorrow, and that person expects someone else to accept it later. The coin moves. The trust moves with it. But this creates a strange vulnerability. What happens when someone tries to cheat? The history of money quickly becomes a history of counterfeiting. Ancient counterfeit coins have been found, including pieces made by plating cheaper materials with precious metals. Their existence shows that the value of a standardized coin created incentives to imitate it. So societies needed ways to defend money. Coins could be designed with recognizable symbols. Their weight and composition could be standardized. Authorities could punish counterfeiters. People developed ways to test precious metals. The more important money became, the more elaborate these systems became. And that leads to one of the strangest transitions in human history. Money gradually stopped being only about the material itself. At first, a silver coin was valuable, partly because silver was valuable. But as monetary systems developed, the authority behind the coin became increasingly important. A stamped piece of metal was accepted because people recognized the institution that issued it. This idea would eventually become much more powerful than the metal. But before we reach the modern world, we need to step backward again. Because coins were not the first way humans represented value. Long before standardized metal currency, ancient civilizations were already keeping records. In Mesopotamia, for example, accounting systems tracked goods, obligations, labor, and payments through writing and measured quantities. This matters because money is not only an object. Money is information. How much do you have? How much do you owe? Who owes you? What did something cost? When can the debt be repaid? Once societies become large enough, keeping track of these relationships becomes essential, and writing becomes one of the tools that makes economic complexity possible. A coin can tell you what something is worth inside a system. A written record can tell you who owes what to whom. Together, They allow economic relationships to exist across time. You can owe something today and repay it months later. You can promise future payment. You can lend resources. You can save wealth. Money is becoming a way to move value through time, not just between people. And that may be its most important transformation. A fisherman catches more fish than his family can eat today. A farmer harvests more grain than can be consumed immediately. A merchant earns money now but plans to spend it later. Money allows today's work to become tomorrow's purchasing power. It turns effort into something portable. It turns value into something that can be stored. And eventually, humans pushed this idea even further. A person did not necessarily need to carry the money physically. A record could represent a debt. A promise could represent future payment. A bank account could represent ownership of money that never sits in your hands. The physical coin slowly became only one part of a much larger system. And that brings us back to the present. Look at the money in your pocket. A piece of paper, a metal disc, perhaps nothing at all. The number on your phone may represent more money than you will ever carry physically in your entire life. And yet you trust that number. You trust that a store will accept it. You trust that a bank will honor it. You trust that someone else will accept it from you tomorrow. This is the same basic idea that allowed a stamped piece of metal to function thousands of years ago. Shared belief, shared standards, shared expectations. The technology changed. The principle did not. We often imagine the invention of money as a simple story. First came barter, then someone invented coins, then banks, then paper, then digital payments. But the reality is more interesting. Humans were solving different economic problems over thousands of years. They were trying to measure value, store value, transfer value, record debts, reduce uncertainty, make trade possible between strangers, and build trust across distances and generations. The coin was one breakthrough in this much larger process. It transformed metal into standardized social information. The shape mattered, the weight mattered, the stamp mattered, but the collective agreement mattered most. Because a coin is valuable, not simply because it is made from metal. It is valuable because people agree that it represents something. And that may be the strangest thing humans ever created. We invented a system where an object could represent future possibilities. A farmer could turn a harvest into coins. A merchant could turn coins into goods. A worker could turn labor into wages. A ruler could turn taxation into armies. And eventually, an entire society could turn abstract numbers into real buildings, roads, ships, businesses, and cities. The metal itself was never the true miracle. The miracle was cooperation. Thousands of unrelated people agreeing, without knowing one another personally, that the same small object could carry value from one human being to the next. Money began as a solution to a practical problem. How do we trade when nobody has exactly what anyone else wants? But it became something much larger. A language, a measuring system, a memory of debts, a bridge between strangers, and ultimately, a way for humans to transform trust into something they could carry in their hands. The first coin did not create value. It created a standardized way to represent value. And from that tiny transformation came an economic system powerful enough to reshape civilizations. Today, the coin is only one form money can take. Sooner or later, the metal may disappear entirely. But as long as humans continue to trust that an invisible number can become something real, the ancient invention is still with us. Because money was never really about gold, silver, paper, or coins. It was about one human being believing that another human being will accept the same promise. And perhaps that is why the most powerful currency humanity ever invented was not metal at all. It was trust. Money was one of the great inventions that allowed us to organize how we interact with one another. But before we could trade across distances, we had to figure out how to navigate them. If you want to see how humans first learned to visualize the world itself, you should watch my video on the invention of maps right here.